Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome back to World Regional Geography. In this lecture, we will focus on history and culture of Southeast Asia. So as I've mentioned before, the region is composed of the peninsula nations and the island nations. And it is also here where we're going to see the development of related and connected civilizations, but also different civilizations as well. For example, when we look at the pre-colonial states of Southeast Asia, one of the most important is the Khmer Empire. The Khmer Empire established itself on the delta of the Mekong River, and today one of its most important landmarks is the ancient city of Angkor, which is abandoned and is a very famous tourist attraction, the most important tourist attraction and ruins in Cambodia. This was an agricultural society that existed from the year 900 to 1500 of the Common Era. So this would be a late medieval civilization. It was an agricultural society that relied on extensive rice field cultivation and extensive irrigation. In fact, one of the traditions of these kingdoms seems to have been to create a capital every 100 years. So there was a shifting of the capital. New cities were built every 100 years. This kingdom was also rival to Siam in the west, which also is an important, Siam is the most important kingdom that influenced Thailand and its identity. And today the core is modern-day Myanmar, Cambodia, and parts of Laos as well. We're also going to have the Champa Kingdom and Annam here in modern-day Vietnam, Siam, as I mentioned. In the south, we're going to have others. Let me just finish with the Khmer Empire. This is the Khmer Empire around 1400 at its height. Here we see again cities like Angkor Wat, but also there are other cities that are still being discovered and being recovered, because this area is again very covered with rainforest, but also there's many ruins that are still being unearthed. Another important pre-colonial state is the Srivijayan Empire, or the Srivijaya Empire, which was established here in the islands of Sumatra. And later on, we're going to see in Java, there's a different kingdom. The Srivijaya existed around the same time as Angkor and the Khmer Empire from 700 to 1400 AD. And this was a thalassocracy. A thalassocracy is a sea-based empire. Other thalassocracies, for example, are the ancient Greek empires as well that were based in the Aegean Sea. And the Srivijaya Empire engaged in extensive maritime trade, and this was part of the ancient Silk Road that connected mainland Asia, China, and the Southeast Asian peninsula with the Southeast Asian islands, and of course India. India and Hinduism and also Buddhism are also very important religions that are brought through trade. The capital of Srivijaya was Palembang, and this was the capital where maritime trade happened. They did not rely on agriculture for its wealth. They taxed maritime trade and imports and exports of goods here. There's an empire that emerges after the Srivijayan Empire. This is going to be the Mahapajit Empire, and they existed for about 200 years, from 1300 to 1500. This was a Hindu-Buddhist state. It was also affected by the arrival of Islam and converted later to the creation of Iceland sultanates. One of the oldest sultanates that still remains is that of the Kingdom of Brunei today. And later on, they saw the arrival of Europeans and the colonial influence, which they tried to resist with the Portuguese and the Dutch. The Portuguese, remember, also brought Catholicism to this region. During the colonial period after 1500, we're going to see the beginning influence of some European empires. First, the Portuguese. Later on, the Portuguese, which established spice trade, Later on, the Spanish, which claim and conquer the Philippines. We're going to see the Dutch take over from the Portuguese, kick out the Portuguese for the most part, and only leave them a few colonies in Goa, Macau, and also in here in East Timor. And the Dutch are going to take over what is today Indonesia and parts of Malaysia, and they are going to call these the Dutch Spice Islands. Later on, the British are going to become more powerful than the Dutch, and we're also going to see the arrival of the French, who are going to claim Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. The United Kingdom is going to colonize modern-day Singapore, Malaysia, and Myanmar, which was part of part of India, of the British Raj during the colonial periods. As I mentioned, the mercantile colonialism, again, was brought by the Portuguese, the Spanish, Dutch, and later the English. One of the most well-known companies, of course, is the Dutch East India Company, which is credited to be the first corporation where people pool together their wealth, and capitalism in this type of market economy begins to take shape here. Later, we're going to see the period of capitalist imperialism from about 1800 to 1945, where the French, the American, and later the Japanese also occupy the region. Japan expands here, in part leading to World War II. Japan begins to also take over countries in the region, and the Japanese, together with the Americans and the locals, kick out the Japanese from the region after during World War II, excuse me. French colonialism remains here for quite a long time, especially in Laos and Vietnam. The French did not want to let go of their colonies. They did not want to grant independence. And part of Japan's intervention, they kick out the French, and then later the Vietnamese, of course, kick out the Japanese, and then the French lose in 1945 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And this is when the French finally pull out, but they invite the Americans to move in. We'll talk about that in a minute. Just to give you an idea, France basically ruled Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as French Indochina, and they extracted rubber. These are rubber trees, what you're seeing the image here. They peel part of the bark, and then it lets out this liquid rubber, which was very important during the industrial period to produce components for all kinds of machinery. This led to guerrilla warfare against the French because the Vietnamese wanted independence. One of the most well-known figures, of course, is Ho Chi Minh, who will be the first president of Vietnam, who will help kick out the French and also defeat the Americans. So the Geneva Agreement that the Vietnamese didn't want, the United States and France wanted this. The Geneva Agreement divided Vietnam into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And this is when the United States is going to get more involved. The U.S. basically becomes afraid that if North Vietnam wins the war against South Vietnam, that this is going to trigger a domino effect. And this leads to the idea of the domino theory, which is basically that if Vietnam becomes a communist country, because remember, China had just become a communist country after the victory of the communists against the nationalists in 1949, I believe, right? So China had just become a major communist country in the region. The U.S. then feared that if Vietnam became communist, Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and other countries in the region would also become communists. So the United States involved first with military advisors, but later on, the United States brought a very large force. Okay, I'm going to talk about what happens in this part of the lecture on what happens in this part of history in the next lecture on history and politics, politics and economics of Southeast Asia.